All right, are we live on YouTube? Let's double check. We get out the handy dandy smartphone, which is tethered to the ground. Brr, 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 brr. I don't think we're live just yet, which is a little bit disturbing. Beep, beep. That's the sound of my cats. Really wish it would show up. Oh, no, it's live. Okay, I can see us right here. Throw this link out to a few folks. Then we're going to go ahead and begin with the first episode of Uncut History. Apologize, this was initially to start at 7 p.m., but it's been a bit of a hectic evening, to say the least. And I was debating if I was just going to push this off till tomorrow, because the anniversary of what we're mainly talking about is actually tomorrow. But I want to get things done today. Still in the midst of finals for college. Today's kind of more of a debriefer. Love history to bits, but after a while researching the same topic, even some things I'm really passionate about, I need a palate cleanser. And I decided my palate cleanser was going to be the Edmund Fitzgerald. You see what type of historian you're dealing with. All right, let's go ahead and begin. So, if anybody is in the chat, you're more willing to message down below. If you want to throw any questions out to me, I'd be more than happy to. First question, what the heck was that? I think that was the sound of one of my cats jumping off the banister and colliding with the ground. Don't worry, landed on all fours. They're fine. So yeah, I'm hoping to start doing this as like maybe a bi-monthly live stream. We'll just talk about different historical anniversaries of every month or whatever month we're in. We're in early to mid-November right now, so there's several big historical events. So the one off the top of my head, November 4th was the anniversary of the Battle of the Wabash, or known better as St. Clair's defeat. Greatest defeat in American military history. But you don't hear about too much because, well, Americans don't want to talk about being defeated, getting our asses whooped, for lack of better terms. So that was on November 4th, and eventually we're going to get a construction paper battlefield going for that. It's kind of on the sidetrack. If actually I could show you. I have been doing work on that one. That's not the right folder. I want to prove that, I'm not just making this stuff up. Maybe down here. Yeah, there it is. See? Map. See, does exist. We are working on Construction Paper Battlefields episode of St. Clair's defeat. So here's the map. There ain't going to be many names on there. St. Clair didn't even know that he was on the Wabash River. He thought he was farther west. So nobody knew where they actually were when this battle occurred. So not a lot to look at, but winter forced. So we are doing work on Construction Paper Battlefields. So that was one of the big anniversaries, and end of November, you'll have the anniversary of the Battle of Franklin, another forgotten about engagement. Now, that is from the American Civil War. They call it the Pickets Charge of the West, but in reality, Gettysburg should be called the Franklin of the East, because this assault on November 30th, 1864 was ridiculous. 20,000 Confederates advancing over 2 miles of open ground in Tennessee, and well-entrenched Union soldiers, mind you. technically, it's a Confederate victory, but that's only because the Union withdrew from the trenches to better earthworks in Nashville overnight after the battle, so call it as you may. But the main anniversary I want to talk about tonight is the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Tomorrow will be the actual anniversary. The ship sunk November 10th, 1975, taking down all 29 hands. Believe it or not, I first discovered it not through the song, the story of the shipwreck. Rather, I think it was Deep Sea Detectives, the History Channel television show back in like 2006, 2007. I was all into the Titanic in the mid 2000s, so my parents would tape the whatever shipwreck documentary was on the History Channel, and happened to be the Edmund Fitzgerald was one of them. It wasn't until after it I realized it was this very big thing in both American and Canadian culture, the sinking of the wreck, because of Gordon Lightfoot's song. Talk to people to this very day, and I'm surprised you'll find people that don't realize this was a real ship, that these people really did work on it and tragically did die in a horrible storm November 10th, 1975. So before we go in, I want to double check something. So pause with me for one moment. I know, we're very high tech here at Redoubt Productions. Brr. All right, got that taken away of. So a little bit of background on the Edmund Fitzgerald. It was a 729-foot ore carrier built for the Great Lakes. It was launched in 1957 and was put into service the following year. And when it went into service, it was the largest of the ships on the Great Lakes. It had the title Queen of the Lakes. Now, a lot of people associate that it was the largest ship, period, on the lake. It actually didn't hold the title of the Queen of the Lakes. I think it was only for about a year in its service. It was surpassed by several other ships. Nevertheless, it still was one of the larger ships and very much hailed as one of the almighty workhorses on the Great Lakes. Primarily, it took taconite ore pellets up and down Lake Superior. And its winter berth, believe it or not, I believe it was Toledo, Ohio. So when you fast forward to 1975, winding down the 17th year of service for the Edmund Fitzgerald, they had one final, I know every story that leads to tragedy, one final voyage. It had one final voyage for the season, and that was to take a routine haul of taconite from Superior, Wisconsin, and then it was going to take it to the other side of Lake Superior to the southeast corner. Well, you can imagine it was not a routine run as the storm that heavily took it down, but when things get all going in the late afternoon on November 9th, nothing's amiss. The ship was over the weight limit that it was designed for, but this was a common thing that happened, weighing it a little bit extra. On board, you had... yeah, I'm going to steal the notes. No expert on this stuff. Captain at the time on November 9th, 1755. You can tell what type of day I'm having. 1975. Ernest McSorley was the captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald. He had over 30 years experience on the Great Lakes, and he's also the oldest crew member on the final voyage. He was 63 years old at the time. He'd actually captained 9 previous ships before he took charge of the Fitzgerald in the early 1970s. So the ship's in good hands. I believe about 9 or 10 of the crew members were multi-year veterans of the lakes. Everybody else had a good couple years underneath them. They were all a trustworthy crew, nothing out of the ordinary. What does start developing is in the early morning hours of November 10th, you got this front that moves over Lake Superior. Started over Kansas November 8th, November 9th, picked up speed considerably when it wafted over Lake Superior. Now, the National Weather Service was originally calling for gales that would produce winds up to about 15 to 20 knots. Very quickly, you're going to start seeing in the reports, start escalating as the front actually hits Lake Superior. Edmund Fitzgerald was not the only ship that was out there by November 10th when this storm starts rolling over Lake Superior. The most famous ship that was out there that was kind of paralleling the Fitzgerald's path was the Arthur M. Anderson. The Arthur M. Anderson at any given time was anywhere from 15 to 20 miles behind the Fitzgerald. The Fitzgerald would be off to the port side, so many miles in front of the Anderson. So both of them were keeping in contact as they enter this horrible storm. And let me go back. Before today, I actually took a dive into the National Transportation Safety Board's official analysis of the wreck. Although their analysis should have a caveat. It was reported, I think it was published in 1978. There had only been a few real dives of the wreck done. Not a lot of good technology was used in doing these dives. So, take this as you will. They're working with the evidence that they had. So by 7 p.m. on November 9th, National Weather Service, they start giving a gale warning for Lake Superior. 34 to 47 knots, my apologies. Already very bad storm. And they're expecting they can produce up to 10-foot waves. But by 10:30 on November 9th, you're going to see that revised to 8 to 15-foot waves. And as you go into the morning of November 10th, the warnings just keep spiking the wave sizes. Now, between 1 and 7 a.m. on November 10th, the Fitzgerald's going to make hourly weather reports. So far, so good. I mean, you're dealing with rocking back and forth, rain and such, but nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to really raise an alarm. Oh, okay, we're back on. Sorry there for a moment. I was messing with something. Now, by 12:52 in the afternoon on November 10th, the Fitzgerald is going to be about 8 miles out to the east of the Arthur M. Anderson. They're both about 17 miles to the northwest of Mickapotten Island. Hey, I'm not from the Great Lakes region. I'm just reading off of the analysis of the disaster analysis. I'm not here to properly translate terms. I apologize in advance. Yinzer accent, of course. So eventually you start getting the Fitzgerald. It's starting to move around these islands. Now, something to keep in mind that I was reading about, the Fitzgerald and Anderson were not taking their normal path, which would have hugged the southern shore of Lake Superior. They had actually deviated from the route to take a little bit closer to the north shore, the Canadian side of Lake Superior. I initially didn't understand why you would do this, but according to the reports, this was a common practice, and still, I assume, is a common practice of when a horrible storm hits the Great Lakes to stay closer to the north shore than is to the south. I guess so the eastwardly winds, if something would happen, would push the ship, I guess, closer north shore. I don't know for certain, but it has deviated. The Fitzgerald did deviate from its original path, trying to keep ahead of the storm. Eventually, it gets caught up in the storm, and it's very quickly, it's crazy how quickly the situation deteriorates. So for a while, you're dealing with rain, and then boom, it's around like 3:30 is when the Fitzgerald goes from having, oh, we're doing good, to we are in trouble. There's me flipping the page. So by 3:30, the Edmund Fitzgerald was northeast of Caribou Island, and it's going to report having a fence railing down. It's going to report several vents are knocked off. It's going to report that the ship itself is taken on a list. So we go from like 3 o'clock to 3:30. The situation is greatly deteriorated, which just gives you an idea how freak of a storm must have hit the Fitzgerald, how quickly the conditions were deteriorated on the ship. Now, by 4:10 p.m., the Edmund Fitzgerald is going to report to the Arthur M. Anderson that both radars are knocked out. So Fitzgerald's now flying blind. The Fitzgerald is going to request for the Anderson to be the navigational eyes for the Fitzgerald, to give regular tabs of where the Fitzgerald's located. So the Fitzgerald, Captain McSorley, is having to rely on the Anderson's captain to give him up-to-the-minute updates for the Anderson's radar. The waves are greatly escalating, and by this point, we're getting reports of over 15-foot waves washing over the decks of the Arthur M. Anderson, presumably also washing over the decks of the Edmund Fitzgerald. As we get into the evening hours, around 5 and 6 p.m. in the evening on November 10th, the Arthur M. Anderson's going to be hit with several heavy waves. Probably we're clocking in well over 20 feet. And something to keep in mind is that every wave is going to hit the Arthur M. Anderson, since it's farther to, it's not necessarily behind, but farther to the west of the Fitzgerald. That means every wave that hits the Anderson is coming for the Fitzgerald. So anything the Anderson hits, they're going to report to Fitzgerald, like, hold on tight. Now, by 5:30, the Fitzgerald was something I'm always familiar with him in contact with the Arthur M. Anderson, but something I was surprised to learn. It was in contact with another ship. It was a small Swedish vessel that was northbound on Lake Superior, coming out of Whitefish Bay, going north. So they're in contact with the Swedish ship, and what the Swedish ship later reports hearing is over the Fitzgerald. It must have been when McSorley was communicating with the Swedish ship. Somebody hollering in the background, "Do not go on deck." So again, situation is greatly deteriorating on the Fitzgerald. Now, by this point, the Fitzgerald, taking a heavy list, it's taken on water, has slowed down its engines. This is to allow the Anderson to catch up to it. So by 7 p.m., the Anderson is only within 10 miles of the Fitzgerald. By 7:10 p.m., Captain McSorley is going to report back to Anderson that they are holding their own. And then at 7:20, when the Anderson's within 9 miles of the Fitzgerald, the Edmund Fitzgerald disappears from the Anderson's radars. By 7:30, the Anderson had floated out of the worst of the storm. They can start seeing lights 20 miles away on the south shore, the American shore of Lake Superior around Whitefish Bay. They can't see anything in the Fitzgerald. Somewhere between 7:10 and 7:20 p.m. on November 10th, the Fitzgerald disappeared from the face of the earth. What happened? It is a question that still lingers on a lot of people's minds to this day. What happened so suddenly that the ship, from one moment, one of the largest ships on the Great Lakes, being there battling a storm, next moment, there's not a trace. There's not a single Mayday message. There's very little debris found. I think the largest piece of debris was part of a lifeboat, which nobody, of course, was in. What happened? The Arthur M. Anderson gets into Whitefish Bay, and they get in. They finally wire the Coast Guard. Now, while all this had been going on between the Fitzgerald and the Anderson, attempts were made by the Fitzgerald and by the Anderson to try to phone in to Coast Guard on the United States shore. They couldn't get anything through. There were several, I'm presuming from the storm, lines were down to a lot of these lighthouses and Coast Guard positions. So it wasn't until the Anderson got out of the storm in the safety of Whitefish Bay, it starts reporting it. We got a 729-foot ore carrier that just disappeared off the face of the planet. What do we do? The Coast Guard asked the Anderson's captain, "Could you go back out and search?" The captain was dumbfounded. He didn't want to. He just survived the storm, and the Fitzgerald presumably has not survived it. And now the Coast Guard is telling the Anderson to about face and go and basically risk its neck trying a rescue mission. Hats off to the captain of the Anderson. He really did not want to go out, but he did. He went out and started the search, and of course, search would continue with the Coast Guard and several other ships after the storms dissipated in the coming days. And like I said, very little was found of the Fitzgerald on the surface. It wouldn't be until the spring of 1976 that it wasn't until 1976 that U.S. Navy got on Lake Superior and dropped one of their new remote operated vehicles to curve free, which truly wasn't, it was just a giant cable that was going down with these cameras. So I guess it wasn't like a true ROV. They were able to photograph the wreck. But as I said, a lot of what I found, a lot of the curve-free investigation in 1976 really didn't yield much. The image was very cloudy, and that's just from the cumbersome equipment they were using at the time. And when the NTSB does finally release its statement in 1978, leaves more questions than answers. What happened? Something that struck me, as I've alluded to already, was something that struck me while reading the NTSB report on the Fitzgerald sinking, just how quickly things deteriorated. The Fitzgerald had been through storms before. This wasn't the first time. I mean, we're dealing with an experienced crew. It had been through storms, but not to this scale. What changed? I think one theory that seems to have some ground. The storm reports were grossly underestimating what the storm was going to become. Initially, they're reporting about 10-foot waves, which, if that would have crashed against the Fitzgerald on its sides, so you have the actual deck, you've had about 4 feet worth of, I don't know what the technical term is, breakage. More, the hull continues up from the deck, and that's intentional, so water doesn't just wash over and break and cause damage on the deck of the ship. So if a 10-foot wave would have had hit the Edmund Fitzgerald, very little of that water would have been able to get over the hull and onto the deck and cause any damage. But then when you're starting to talk about 20-plus foot waves, yeah, the 4-foot clearance would have been easily overcome. Then you would have had flooding on the deck. Water would have become trapped on the deck. That water is going to weigh down. There were about 20 cargo holds that were on the Fitzgerald that had these big, I don't know what you call them, these big covers on, these big metal covers on. And if that water starts smashing on it and you have water sitting on it, that's definitely bound to cause some of them to bust. Something else that's interesting, now this wasn't really mentioned on the NTSB survey, but I found on more recent videos watching about, and I forget the name of it. Who was the guy? I was watching it yesterday. He was actually interviewing one of the descendants of the crew members of the Fitzgerald, and something they revealed, that there was a particular section of the hull that had received repeated damage from minor incidents over the Fitzgerald's history. It was the same particular spot. I think it was like L section, I think it was what it was called. And it was just minor stuff over the years. So the Fitzgerald had hit lock walls several times. The ship had run aground once in its service. It got into a collision once. Actually, it lost its anchor in the Detroit River in 1974, and that anchor is actually on display at a maritime museum off on the Great Lakes today. Just huge anchors and fell off. So the final few years of the Fitzgerald were not very lucky. Nothing too severe, but nothing lucky either. So maybe there's a possibility that all that wear and tear, having to replace, because you're keeping the replaces stuff over the years, maybe it all added up to failure that night on November 10th. Who knows? One of the other theories that was often thrown around was that the Fitzgerald ran aground. I mentioned about a Caribou Island. A lot of the maps they were using on the Great Lakes at the time, particularly for the Fitzgerald, were grossly out of date. I think the one map was a Canadian map from 1915. Wasn't really showing the depth of the water too well. One of the big theories is that the Fitzgerald, when it neared Caribou Island, it actually grounded. Now, later surveys of the wreck have revealed no damage of that caliber to the underside of the ship. Now, granted, and this leads into the other theory, the Edmund Fitzgerald sits in 2 pieces on the bottom of Lake Superior today. And if you actually measure up the surviving pieces, there's about 200 feet of the ship that's disintegrated all over the place. It's not intact. So this leads to one of the other theories that it broke up on the surface. I mentioned earlier about the prior accidents causing issues, maybe possible stress issues with the hull, that these giant rogue waves just exasperated. So in 1980, Jacques Cousteau, who's a pretty famous diver, he was, well, there goes my cats. What was I saying? Jacques Cousteau, yeah. He was up in the St. Lawrence River making a documentary, and he decided to take a submersible over to the Fitzgerald's wreck and get some footage. I think he only stayed there for like 10 minutes. But then he comes out with this new theory that stated, oh yeah, the ship must have broke up because my evidence says so. I I know I just said that I believe there's some truth that the hull must have been weakened from all the replacement jobs from these minor incidents. I personally don't buy that the ship broke up on the surface. And the only reason is when you see the expeditions in 1989 and 1994, the photographs that they reveal, the damage is frightening to the ship. If the ship had broken up, it had been piecemeal, broken up, and we have examples of other ships breaking up on the surface in storms. Believe it or not, there was a ship named the Daniel J. Morrell, and why I find that so interesting, the Daniel J. Morrell is named after one of the key figures of the Cambria Iron Works up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And if you know my channel, we love talking about Johnstown stuff, like the Johnstown flood. So that's why I'm finding it so peculiar. Anyways, the Daniel J. Morrell, when it sunk back in the 1960s, it broke up on the surface, but the two segments are about like 5 miles apart each other on the lake floor. If the Fitzgerald had broken up, it would have drifted on the surface at least. It would have drifted away. You wouldn't have the two segments so close together on the ocean floor. So I don't buy that it broke up on the surface. I don't, like I said, also running aground. The NTSB kind of shot down that idea, mostly from just looking at the hull of the ship. There was no tears in the hull that looks like a breach. The listing seems to me that it came from water weighing down on the top of the deck, maybe breaching through one of the cargo holds and starting to fill that up. That would make more sense to me. The water's coming in from the top and gradually putting the Fitzgerald lower into the water. Ultimately, I mean, to this day, it's still a mystery, and the last dive to the wreck was in 1995. For understandable reasons, the families have asked that no more dives be conducted on the Fitzgerald, because really, at the end of the day, when we debate all these, like, why did it sink? Was it because of this? Was it because of that? What changes the fact that 29 people died that night? No evidence is going to change that fact that 29 people died and they're not coming back. Personally, to me, I think probably what happened, I think that there was some minor structural, I don't want to say that structural failure, just minor structural issues just from years of abuse, just being on the Great Lakes. And I think this storm, many people underestimated what this storm was going to become. This was a perfect storm for a disaster in a sense. So you got all these waves greatly increasing in size. You have these giant 20-foot waves hitting the Anderson. Most likely they hit the Fitzgerald. If the Fitzgerald was taken on water, it was lower in the water than it should have been, so it would have been more prone to be swamped by one of these giant waves. And I think just after one too many times, one of them waves just pushed the Fitzgerald under the water. Probably was moving so fast when it went underwater that when it hit the ground, when it hit the lake bed, the propeller was still moving because everything was happening so quickly. Fitzgerald hits the ground, the propeller, the propulsion system's still active, so that causes it to torque. The stern flips upside down, tears off from the bow, and both pieces come to lie next to each other. I mean, maybe the only good thing to know is the crew probably did not know what hit them. That's the only thing we can hope. I think it was a very, very quick and violent end to the Fitzgerald. I'm going to take a water break. But of course, the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald does not end with the sinking on November 10th, 1975. If it just ended there, probably not have been as big of a story as it is today. Just been another ship sunk on the Great Lakes. But Gordon Lightfoot, of course, wrote a very famous song about the sinking. Believe it or not, Gordon Lightfoot recalls that, I was reading an interview where he recalls that night up in Canada, that storm, how violent it was, and hoping that nobody was out there. And unfortunately, 29 souls were out there when it happened. And then the following year, he read a article in a magazine about the earlier investigations in the Fitzgerald. and that kind of spurred him having to write almost like a Irish shanty about this shipwreck. And what results is one of the most chilling songs to ever top the charts here in the United States as well as Canada. The song's almost 7 minutes long. It's a very long song. I mean, it's very unusual for a song of this type of material, of this type of tone. I mean, it's written like it's written like an Irish shanty, as I said earlier. This is not music you would have associated of the mid-70s, let alone anything that's going to top the charts at any period in history. But I believe it made it up to number 2 in the United States, and I know it made it number 1 in Canada and several other places around the world. And because of that song, most people know the name of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Even if they don't know directly what it means, they know subconsciously it involves some ship that Lightfoot sings about going down into the ice water mansions of Lake Superior. Lake Superior never gives up its dead. Some things I found interesting doing research. I always like delving into the personal stories. I wish I would have had more time. I'll probably someday do a more proper video on the Fitzgerald. I've just wanted to throw something out since the anniversary is tomorrow. As I mentioned, the oldest crew member was Ernest McSorley, the captain of the ship. The youngest crew member, his name was Mark Andrew Thomas. He was only 21 years old. He's even younger than me. One of the more well-written about people that were on the Fitzgerald that night is a guy by the name of Bruce Lee Hudson. He was 22 years old. He was very active in his community. I feel he was in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Very active, member of the church, member of Scouts, member of the marching band, did all sorts of different stuff. And because of how involved he was with the community, he is commemorated now by an annual grant that's bestowed at North Olmsted High School, which he attended. And then something I also found interesting, most of the crew were from the Ohio area, from a lot of states that border the Great Lakes, a lot though from Ohio. There was one crew member from Pennsylvania, from Western Pennsylvania, the part of PA that I'm part of. His name was George J. Hull. He was 60 years old. I couldn't find like an obituary, too much written about him. But one thing I did find noted, he was actually part of the Merchant Marines during the Second World War, and then just stuck to the maritime job after the war concluded. So he was 60 years old when he went down on the Fitzgerald that night, November 10th, 1975. So that's all I have written on the Fitzgerald. That's really what I have. If you would want to see a more proper video, this is just me off the cuff talking about it. I'd be more than happy to. Let me know in the comments section. The other major thing we want to talk about, I'm going to be actually releasing a podcast here in the near future. Now, it's not going to be for Readout Productions, unfortunately. It's may not be what everybody's interested in fact. What we're going to be doing, me, a humble collector, one of my fellow friends who's been teaming up on a lot of our videos lately, and his sibling Jessica, we have all teamed together, and we're going to start doing a podcast where we're going to take 2 different types of media, be it movies, books, albums, shows, you name it, and comparing them because of similar themes that we find in them. So we're not necessarily comparing sequels of each other or 2 things from the same franchise, just 2 things that, hey, this is reminding me of that. Let's compare them and see if anything lines up. We're going to call this podcast Heterochrome Media. Heterochrome. Like heterochromia, the different eye color thing that normally cats befall. You don't have heterochromia, do you, Lily? No, you don't. No, you have a lot of other things that are weird about you. So we're going to be doing heterochrome media. We'll be taking 2 different forms of media that we find something similar about each other and comparing them. The first episode will be releasing just to YouTube. I still got to get the Buzzsprout account set up, but eventually you'll be able to listen to it as an audio thing on different other accounts. But the heterochrome media will start with just YouTube. The first episode will be out this Saturday. Or no, my apologies. It'll be out this Friday. It'll be out Friday. The first episode of Heterochromedia will be out Friday. Look, it's been a long day. My schedule is non-existent anymore. So the channel's already up. There's not much done to it just yet. There's a link to the channel in the description below. So if you want to continue supporting my different ventures, I would very much appreciate if you would hop on over and listen to our first podcast. I've been talking about doing this for a while, especially when we did the John Brown Isekai. The first episode, which the episode's actually 3 parts, it'll be released over 3 weeks. The first episode is going to be a comparison between the 1989 war film Glory, about the famed 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment, comparing it to the 2021 anime 86, which is a mecha anime. So I know 2 very different things to compare, but I believe there's a lot of similarities. And if you watch episode 1, I hope you can see why we came to compare those 2. But we're going to be doing other ones here shortly. We're going to be meeting up again to actually start recording episode 2, because episode 1's already recorded. It'll just be released in thirds. We'll be recording episode 2 shortly, so I'm very excited for it. It'll be something it's not something I normally do. And I haven't thought about keeping it 2 readout productions, but we ultimately made a decision collectively that it'd probably best just to do it as its own separate thing. I know not everybody here is into us talking about anime and movies and things of that nature, things that don't have nothing really to do with educating about history. So if that does interest you, if you want to see us talk about pop culture stuff, Heterochromedia, be sure to subscribe to it. But if you want to mainly just hear us talk about history and talk about historical events in and out of the Lower Highlands, probably best just to stick to Readout Productions. But I'd be more than happy if some of you folks check out what Heterochromedia is all about. So first part of episode 1 will be dropping this Friday. It'll just be on YouTube. Eventually we're going to get on Buzzsprout, where it'll be then an actual podcast. I just haven't had the time with finals. Let's see. What else can we talk about? So we talked about the Fitzgerald, talked about Heterochromedia. Tell you what, I think I'm going to wrap things up a little bit early. I was hoping to do this a little bit longer, but again, schedule got wiped out. Hopefully we can find a time, maybe a day of the week at a certain time that would be better doing these live streams. I know this one was really all over the place. I feel I didn't start getting to the groove until halfway through, talking about the Edmund Fitzgerald stuff. But I definitely want to do more of this Uncut history. But I think we'll do it like a twice a month thing. I don't think I can do this as a weekly thing. But I think maybe twice a month we'll do this. And maybe an anniversary of a big history event comes around and doesn't really fit into one of my regular videos. Throw something like this out here. Alright guys, we're going to wrap up for the night. If you want to support Readout Productions, want to help us continue doing these things like going out and traveling and retracing history, there's several ways you can help us out. Number 1 is subscribing to us. Number 2 is sharing our videos. And number 3, for those that are very generous, I do have a Ko-fi account, K-O-F-I. Is it Ko-fi or coffee? I don't know. There is a Ko-fi account which allows you to contribute donations to Readout Productions. If you give anything, I will greatly appreciate it. You don't have to ever feel like you have to give me money, though. I'm not begging. I just had a couple people ask about it, and I opened it up for those that do want to go the extra mile. If you go the extra mile, I greatly appreciate it. And, well, we'll see you in the next video. There ain't going to be any regular videos this week. This is the only big one. Heterochromedia, part 1 of episode 1 is coming out Friday. Got to get finals done. Once we get through this semester of college, I'll get back in the groove of editing videos. Well, thank you guys for sticking around for Uncut History, number 1, about the Edmund Fitzgerald. We'll see you in Uncut History, part 2. Good night, everybody.